Stephanie Dobson is back with us this week. Stephanie is a lawyer and mediator at Hanka Divorce Law and Mediation here in Lloydminster. And we're back for another episode of Healthy, Thriving Families in Two Homes. And Stephanie, this week we're going to be talking about Halloween, which normally people don't think too much about. But if you are a couple that has children, and you share support, it could be a contentious issue, really, especially falling on a weekend, which it does this time. So let's talk about how to figure out sharing Halloween celebrations between parents.
Sure, you're absolutely right, Stacey. There's lots of times where this actually can become a great deal of conflict, and it depends on the situation as to the importance that families or parents place on the particular holiday as to likely the amount of conflict that will arise. So if separated or divorced parents do feel that it's important to somehow share this particular holiday, here's a few ideas for the sharing of the actual October 31st, the day of Halloween itself. Number one, the parents could decide to alternate years. So this year, one parent has the children for that particular day, and the next year, the next parent has the kids. Now, some parents may say, no, but I want the kids, and each year I want to see them. So you might decide that you're going to split that day. Some parents that I meet with will say each parent will have at least 2 hours of costume time with the children in each day. And of course, it depends if it's a weekday or weekend, can sometimes impact that amount of time. Or you can look at it from the kids' viewpoint and say that both parents will be able to join in on the kid-type celebrations. And of course, that's age dependent as to what they'll be able to do. Or if parents don't want to plan so far ahead, they might say, well, I can't figure out what I'm doing next week, much less every year at Halloween. So you may want to add a degree of flexibility and just say by October 1st in every year, we agree that we'll talk about what's going to happen on Halloween day. Now, just one more added consideration. You may want to think of Halloween as more than just October 31st, the day, and think of Halloween parties or school dress-up day or the act of trick-or-treating itself, or there might be other celebrations that go along with Halloween, and decide on how you're going to share more broadly the Halloween celebrations.
What about when it comes to costumes? Because parents can have radically different views on what's appropriate for a costume. So how do you work that out when going through the separation and divorce process, and especially if you don't agree on what costumes your children should be wearing?
Well, you're absolutely right. So there's a degree of appropriateness there, and there's so many considerations with respect to costumes. It can really become a sore point between parents. So let's first talk about costume selection. So you talked about appropriateness, but there's also, kids often will want to decide on what they want to be for Halloween or what costume they want. And so you might want to come to agreement with if parents want to decide that will have a voice in the costume choice, or if they want to leave that specifically up to the children. Let's next talk about budgets. Now, Halloween costumes, I can't believe every year I look at the prices of these Halloween costumes and I think I give my children a budget most definitely. But Halloween costumes are not necessarily a Section 7, a special expense, but parents may want to decide on how they're going to share the price of these costumes. Now, for my kids, I know I always say 1 year you can buy a costume, the next year it's going to be a DIY costume or a reused costume, because it's just, again, especially when you're in two homes, your budgets are often tighter, and you may want to consider those for Halloween. Now, lastly, I encourage you to make a plan as to the actual dressing up of those kiddos. Now, there's more than one day that they will dress up, but this sort of relates back to tip number one of who's going to get to do the dressing up and who's going to get to be there to see the kids in their costumes.
What about when it comes to guidelines? Because again, there could be things that are different in each home where it comes to curfew or how much candy they get, that sort of thing. So how do you deal with that?
Well, for most kids, Halloween is about three things: candy, and more candy.
Right.
And so sometimes parents have differing views of what that is going to look like, and what those guidelines are going to be in each of the homes. I do encourage parents to talk with as much detail as possible to make sure that they're on the same page as much as possible. So First thing, you talked about curfew. So if your kids are old enough to go out by themselves or without the parents, you may want to come to an agreement as to what the curfew is going to be for Halloween or for Halloween celebrations more generally. Is that going to be just the on-duty parent, whoever has the children at that time, is going to make the decision, or is that something that the parents decide together? Secondly, candy. So my kids have learned from a young age they get to keep about 10% of the candy that they get from trick-or-treating. But for them, it's more about the act of actually going house to house that's the fun part for them, and seeing their friends and going around with their friends, as opposed to the actual consumption of candy. But every family is a little bit different, so try to come up with some guidelines as to what that's going to look like in each home. Lastly, I have to mention it because we're in the middle of a pandemic, or in our whatever number of wave we're in. So COVID, it's always important to take those COVID precautions when you're going out trick-or-treating. There's lots of resources online about how to have COVID-safe Halloween. But what I find with separated and divorced parents is that often they have differing views about COVID safety or COVID protocols that they take in their home. So of course, with Halloween, you're interacting with strangers, going house to house, for example, for Halloween. And so it's really important to try as best as possible to get on the same page so that there is as little risk as possible to exposure to our good old COVID virus.
Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us this week, and we will be back again next week to chat some more.
Thanks, Stacey.